And to discuss this further, joining me in the studio is Mehmet Celik. He's the political editor for the Daily Sabah newspaper, and also Huseyin Alptekin. He is a professor at Istanbul Şehir University. He's also involved with the Turkish think tank SETA. Let's begin with you, Huseyin. How was the PKK over 40 years able to franchise and spread so effectively, not just in Turkey, but across the region?
Actually, the franchise process for the PKK is not something new. We talk more about that today because of the Syrian civil war, but actually the PKK itself grew stronger and expanded from Syria. Because when the organization moved to Syria in early 80s, that was the place where the organization built its initial camps, and the leader of the organization, Abdullah Öcalan, lived in this country until he was forced to leave the country and captured in 1999. So that's one of the root countries of the PKK. They were going there from Turkey, they were Turkish citizens, but the organizational structure was formed basically in Syria.
Let's show our viewers a map of where the PKK is in the Middle East. They have a franchise in Syria, as you mentioned, the PYD, and its arm being the YPG. They've got an offshoot also operating in Iraq and in Iran as well, centered, of course, in the Kandil Mountains in Iraq. Was the Turkish response over these 40 years adequate to stop the spread of the PKK, Mehmet?
I think Turkey, as a state, did what it can. At the same time, we should acknowledge that there were some gaps in their policies. However, we should also acknowledge that while Turkey was fighting against this terrorist organization under the name of PKK, what were its allies doing is another question we should ask. Because when we see that the PKK is using some of the very sophisticated weapons against Turkish army, or how PKK was able to establish itself across European cities for its financial resources, how it is able to make recruitments from European cities to join its lines, we should ask how was it Turkey's allies was helping Turkey to fight this franchise, which is not a franchise, which is not an organization that is only existing in Turkey. Because in the 90s, PKK was a problem of Turkey in the southeast. But now, throughout its development, we see that PKK has established itself across northern Syria, northern Iraq, and Iran as well. But its main source of life comes from the western parts of the world.
It's interesting you mentioned that. And the US, EU, other European countries inside the EU consider the PKK to be a terrorist group. Yes. It's prescribed. On the other hand, when you mention friends, the US has been arming the PKK in Syria, and specifically the YPG, which is the offshoot of the PKK. Let's listen in to an exchange a few years ago between Senator Lindsey Graham and the then US Defense Secretary Ash Carter, and listen to what they had to say.
Reports indicate that they're aligned or at least have substantial ties to the PKK. Is that true?
Yes, we haven't.
Is the PKK a terrorist organization in the eyes of the Turkish government?
The PKK is a terrorist organization not only in the eyes of the Turkish government, but in the eyes of the U.S. government as well, Senator.
So we saw that exchange from a few years ago. Huseyin, tell us about the U.S. involvement in basically consolidating the PKK and YPG's hold in places like Syria.
Which is quite shocking for Turkey, actually, because Turkey and the United States have been very strong allies, and they managed to work out many problematic issues in the region in the past. But when we look at the past of these relationships, even the capture of the Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the organization, was a result of a cooperation between the Turkish and American secret services. But now when we look at the situation today in Syria, that's quite shocking for Turkey, actually, that the United States is helping and arming and sheltering such a terrorist organization in Syria.
But the US has also said, and it has maintained, that the YPG, yes, it has links to the PKK, but it is still instrumental in fighting Daesh. And that brings us to what's happening today. We've got Turkish soldiers in Afrin fighting the YPG. You've got Manbij in play, where US forces are stationed alongside the YPG, and that is becoming a little fractious as well, especially as far as the regime is concerned. Reports of fighting between regime forces and SDF YPG in Manbij. Do you think Turkey took too long, as far as the crisis in Syria is concerned, to allow the YPG an opportunity?
Turkey wanted to solve the problem through dialogue and diplomatic channels with its NATO ally, which have been one of the strongest allies in NATO, Turkey and the US. But the US unfortunately kept failing in keeping up its promises with Turkey. I mean, during the Obama administration, it was said that the YPG forces will not cross to the west of the Euphrates, and they will go back to the east of Euphrates. But unfortunately, while that didn't happen, the U.S. administration kept arming the group as well. So Turkey waited a little bit and wanted to see how this will continue during the Trump administration. But unfortunately, due to domestic relations in the U.S. government, particularly the rivalry, almost we can say a rivalry between White House, Pentagon, and CENTCOM, the relation between Turkey and the U.S. has been even further complicated because the U.S. the White House is now also supporting the YPG, same as it happened during the Obama administration.
I want to very quickly bring in Huseyin here. You were talking about a historic relation where Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, was giving refuge, and Syria was giving refuge to Abdullah Öcalan till he was told to leave under pressure. Tell us about the present-day relationship between Bashar al-Assad and the YPG. It's quite a complicated relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, the relations are quite complicated in Syria because we don't have just two sides. There are multiple parties there. There is the regime forces, there is the YPG, there was and still is the Daesh threat, and there are other rebels. And the alliances are shifting very dramatically, very radically, very fast. And in some cases, we see that these two actors, the YPG forces and the regime forces, had this tacit mutual understanding that they will not be in each other's way. We saw some sporadic clashes between the two regimes, between the two actors, but for most of the time they avoided a direct clash and just waited for the post-Daesh period.
Huseyin, I'm afraid we'd have to leave it there. Huseyin Alptekin and Mehmet Celik, thank you so much.